There is a quiet illusion we often fall into when trying to understand others. We listen to what they say, admire how confidently they speak, or judge them by the roles they perform in public. Yet character does not live in words or appearances. It lives in the unseen spaces where consciousness meets instinct, where the mask slips, and the true self quietly reveals itself. To truly see a person, you do not need long observation or intimate access to their life. You only need to watch two moments so ordinary that most people overlook them. The first is how a person treats those who cannot offer them anything in return. This moment exposes the structure of their inner world. When someone interacts with those who hold no power over them, no influence, no advantage, the ego has nothing to gain. There is no audience to impress, no reward to chase. What remains is the raw orientation of their psyche. If kindness appears here, it is not a performance. It is a habit rooted in the unconscious, formed long before the moment occurred. Many people are generous when generosity is profitable. They are respectful when respect enhances their image. But watch how they speak to the invisible figures in their lives, the overlooked, the ignored, the ones who exist outside the hierarchy of importance. In these interactions, you witness whether compassion is an instinct or merely a strategy. The psyche cannot pretend forever in spaces where the ego sees no benefit. This reveals something deeper. A person who devalues those beneath them is not expressing strength but unresolved inner conflict. Such behavior often emerges from a fractured relationship with their own shadow, the parts of themselves they refuse to acknowledge. By projecting worthlessness onto others, they momentarily escape the discomfort of facing their own vulnerability. In contrast, those who treat the powerless with dignity have integrated more of themselves. They recognize, consciously or not, that the same fragility exists within them. The second moment to observe is how a person behaves when they do not get their way. This is where the inner child, the suppressed impulses, and the unexamined wounds surface. Disappointment removes the polish from the personality. When desire is blocked, the unconscious responds before the rational mind can intervene. Irritation, resentment, silence, manipulation, or humility all emerge as spontaneous reactions. A person who collapses into bitterness when frustrated is revealing an inner dependence on external control. Their sense of self is tied to outcomes rather than values. When life resists them, they experience it not as a challenge but as an attack. This reveals an ego that has not learned to coexist with limitation. It has not yet accepted that the world does not exist to fulfill personal expectation. On the other hand, someone who meets disappointment with composure is not emotionless. They feel the same frustration, the same sting, but they have developed an inner structure capable of containing it. They do not require immediate victory to remain whole. Such a person has faced their own chaos and learned to sit with it. Their strength does not come from dominance over circumstances, but from dialogue with their inner tension. These two moments, power without accountability and frustration without fulfillment, act as mirrors. They reflect how a person relates to themselves when no reward is present and when no control is possible. Together, they form a psychological fingerprint more accurate than any self-description. True character is not chosen in grand decisions. It is expressed in reflexes shaped over years of inner negotiation. What someone does instinctively reveals what they have made peace with and what they continue to deny. You cannot hide from these moments because they bypass intention and reveal orientation. When you learn to observe in this way, judgment becomes unnecessary. Understanding replaces it. You begin to see that harmful behavior often signals unresolved inner pain, and genuine kindness signals inner reconciliation. This does not excuse actions, but it explains them. To see someone clearly is not to analyze their story or admire their self-image. It is to notice how they move when the world offers them nothing, and when the world says no. In these spaces, the psyche speaks honestly and character steps out from behind the mask when observing how a person treats those who have no power, status, or benefit to offer. You are witnessing the psyche in a state where performance loses its purpose. In such moments, the carefully constructed persona grows thin because there is no reward attached to maintaining it. The individual is no longer negotiating with society but standing alone with their own internal order. What emerges here is not behavior chosen for effect, but behavior dictated by habit. And habit is shaped by what has been repeated in the unconscious over many years. Power creates distortion. When someone stands above another in a hierarchy, their actions are often influenced by fear of loss, desire for approval, or ambition for gain. But when that hierarchy disappears, When the other person exists outside usefulness, the ego relaxes its vigilance. There is no transaction to manage. In this absence of incentive, the deeper structure of values reveals itself without resistance. This is why the smallest interactions often carry the greatest truth. A passing remark, a tone of voice, a moment of impatience, or an unexpected gentleness or act as symbols, pointing toward an inner attitude that rarely reaches consciousness. Those who treat the powerless with disregard often believe they are expressing superiority. Psychologically, the opposite is usually true. Such behavior frequently signals an unresolved conflict with their own sense of worth. By diminishing others, they temporarily elevate themselves, compensating for an inner insecurity they cannot name. The unconscious seeks balance, and when self-respect is fragile, the psyche looks outward for ways to restore it. This restoration is false and short-lived, requiring constant repetition, which is why such individuals often display the same pattern again and again, especially when they feel unseen or unchallenged. In contrast, a person who consistently shows respect where none is demanded has internalized a sense of value that does not depend on comparison. Their dignity is not borrowed from position or authority. It exists prior to interaction. This does not mean they are free from conflict or shadow, but it suggests that they have established a dialogue with their darker impulses rather than allowing those impulses to govern behavior unconsciously. Their kindness is not naive. It is structured, grounded, and often quiet, requiring no recognition. The way someone treats those beneath them also reveals their relationship with empathy. Empathy is not merely the ability to feel for others, it is the capacity to recognize oneself in another human being. When this recognition is absent, people become categories rather than individuals. The powerless are reduced to functions, obstacles, or background elements. This reduction serves a psychological purpose. By stripping others of complexity, the individual avoids confronting their own vulnerability. To see another fully is to acknowledge that the same fears, weaknesses, and desires exist within oneself. Often, cruelty in these moments is not deliberate. It is automatic. Automatic behavior is the most honest behavior the psyche can offer. It arises before reflection, before morality intervenes. This is why observation is more revealing than conversation. People can explain their values endlessly, but their instincts tell a more precise story. Instinct does not lie, it only expresses what has been allowed to grow unchecked. There is also a subtle form of contempt that hides behind politeness. A person may appear courteous while inwardly dismissing the other as insignificant. This inner posture still shapes behavior through impatience, indifference, or emotional withdrawal. True respect does not depend on visibility. It is present even when the other person is unlikely to remember the interaction. The unconscious recognizes when respect is genuine and when it is merely a social reflex. From a psychological perspective, the powerless often act as mirrors for rejected aspects of the self. Weakness, dependence, uncertainty, and need are qualities many individuals suppress in order to function in competitive environments. When these qualities appear embodied in another person, they provoke discomfort. That discomfort is often discharged through irritation or avoidance. By rejecting the other, the individual symbolically rejects those same traits within themselves. This dynamic operates quietly, rarely noticed, yet it governs countless everyday interactions. Those who have confronted their own fragility respond differently. Having accepted their limitations, they no longer need to deny them externally. They can meet vulnerability without fear, because it no longer threatens their identity. Their behavior toward the powerless reflects an internal reconciliation, an understanding that strength and weakness are not opposites but partners within the psyche. This is why environments where no reward is present are so psychologically revealing. When no audience exists, the ego stops rehearsing. The inner orientation takes over. The tone of voice becomes unguarded. Patience or impatience surfaces naturally. Compassion either flows or does not. These moments are not insignificant. They are diagnostic. To observe this consistently is to understand that character is not a fixed trait but a pattern. Patterns emerge only through repetition. A single act can deceive, but repeated interactions with those who offer nothing in return form a reliable map of a person's inner world. Over time, this map becomes impossible to ignore. It shows where empathy is rooted, where resentment lingers, where fear hides beneath authority, and where integrity exists without supervision. In recognizing this, one also gains insight into oneself. The observer is never neutral. What disturbs or comforts us in others often signals unresolved material within our own psyche. Observation, therefore, becomes a mirror as much as a lens. The way we interpret another's behavior toward the powerless reveals our own expectations, wounds, and values, drawing attention to areas within that remain unexplored, waiting to be acknowledged, integrated, and understood in the quiet spaces where no one is watching and nothing is to be gained when a person is denied control, success, or recognition. A subtle but profound shift occurs within their inner world. In this moment, the external structure that supports the ego weakens, and the psyche must respond without its usual defenses. What appears is not a calculated response but an instinctive one, shaped by unresolved tensions, early experiences, and deeply held beliefs about worth, power, and identity. Frustration acts as a psychological solvent, dissolving the image a person holds of themselves and revealing what lies beneath. Control provides the ego with a sense of safety. It creates the illusion that one's inner stability depends on the ability to shape outcomes. When this illusion is interrupted, the psyche reacts swiftly, often before reason can intervene. Some react with anger, others with withdrawal, others with blame, and some with quiet reflection. Each reaction carries meaning. It signals how the individual relates to limitation, uncertainty, and the reality that the world does not obey personal desire. Those who respond to denial with rage or hostility are often defending against an inner feeling of powerlessness. The external obstacle awakens an old wound, one formed when autonomy was once threatened or denied. The present moment becomes fused with the past, and the emotional response far exceeds the situation itself. The unconscious does not distinguish between then and now. It only recognizes a familiar threat. In this way, frustration becomes a gateway through which unresolved experiences resurface, demanding expression. Others respond with manipulation, subtle or overt. When direct control is lost, they seek indirect means to restore it. This reveals a psyche uncomfortable with vulnerability. Rather than tolerate the discomfort of not getting what they want, they reshape the environment emotionally or socially. Silence, guilt, passive resistance, or charm become tools. These behaviors are not always conscious. They are strategies learned long ago, often in environments where direct expression was unsafe or ineffective. There are also those who collapse inward when denied success or recognition. Their energy drains, motivation disappears, and self-doubt takes over. This reaction suggests that self-worth has been tied too closely to external validation. Without acknowledgement, the individual feels diminished, as though their existence requires confirmation from the outside. The frustration is not merely about the lost outcome, but about the threat to identity itself. The psyche struggles because it has not developed an internal source of value independent of achievement. In contrast, a person who can tolerate frustration without disintegration has cultivated an inner center that remains stable even when circumstances resist them. This does not mean they are unaffected. Disappointment still arises, but it is contained rather than acted out. Such containment is not repression. It is the result of familiarity with inner conflict. They have encountered their own impulses and learned that not every desire must be satisfied to preserve wholeness. The ability to remain composed in frustration often points to a mature relationship with the shadow. The shadow contains envy, resentment, ambition, and aggression, forces that emerge strongly when blocked. When these forces are denied or moralized away, they erupt uncontrollably under pressure. When they are acknowledged and integrated, they lose their destructive urgency. Frustration then becomes information rather than a threat, signaling unmet needs or unrealistic expectations. Recognition, in particular, exposes deep psychological patterns. Many individuals unconsciously seek acknowledgement as a substitute for inner affirmation. When recognition is withheld, they experience it as rejection rather than neutrality. This reaction often traces back to formative relationships where approval was conditional. The psyche learned to equate being seen with being valued. Denial of recognition in adulthood reactivates this equation, producing disproportionate emotional responses. Observing how someone behaves in these moments reveals whether they see obstacles as enemies or as realities to be engaged with. Some interpret resistance as a personal affront, a sign that the world is unjust or conspiring against them. Others perceive it as a boundary, an invitation to reassess strategy, timing, or desire. This difference reflects the depth of psychological differentiation between self and circumstance. Control, when examined closely, is often a defense against chaos. Those who fear inner disorder seek to impose order externally. When that order collapses, anxiety rushes in. The resulting behavior may appear domineering, dismissive, or volatile, but beneath it lies fear of disintegration. The psyche clings to control because it doubts its ability to withstand uncertainty. Frustration exposes this doubt mercilessly. Those who have learned to coexist with uncertainty respond differently. They do not confuse limitation with annihilation. Their sense of self is flexible enough to absorb failure without fracturing. This flexibility is not weakness, it is resilience born from self-knowledge. They understand, consciously or intuitively, that frustration is not an interruption of life, but an integral part of it. In social settings, denial of recognition often reveals hidden hierarchies within the psyche. A person may tolerate failure privately but react strongly when their efforts go unnoticed by others. This indicates that the ego's primary concern is not the work itself, but its reflection in the eyes of others. Where recognition is valued more than meaning, frustration quickly turns into resentment. These reactions rarely announce themselves clearly. They appear in tone, timing, withdrawal, sarcasm, or sudden indifference. Such subtleties are more revealing than dramatic outbursts. They show how deeply the need for control or validation has penetrated the personality. Over time, patterns become visible. The same frustration produces the same reaction, regardless of context, indicating that the response is internal rather than situational. To observe someone in these moments is to witness their relationship with reality as it is, not as they wish it to be. Reality resists everyone eventually. How a person meets that resistance tells you whether they are engaged in a dialogue with life, or locked in a struggle against it. The psyche either adapts or defends, learns or repeats. Frustration strips away intention and exposes orientation. It shows whether a person's strength depends on success or on self-awareness, whether their calm is conditional or rooted, whether their identity expands or contracts under pressure. These moments are not exceptions to character. They are expressions of it, arising naturally where the ego can no longer maintain its preferred image and must reveal how it truly relates to desire, loss, and limitation. The contrast between public behavior and private, unobserved actions reveal the architecture of a person's inner life more accurately than any declaration of values. In public, the individual is surrounded by mirrors. Every gesture is reflected, evaluated, and absorbed into an image that must be maintained. The psyche adapts quickly to this environment, constructing a persona that aligns with expectation, approval, and survival within a social framework. This persona is not false in a simple sense, but it is selective. It emphasizes what is rewarded and conceals what is risky. Public behavior is shaped by anticipation. One speaks not only to communicate, but to manage perception. One acts not only from impulse, but from calculation. This calculation is often unconscious yet highly refined. Over time, it becomes habitual, giving the impression of authenticity. The danger lies in confusing consistency with truth. A well-maintained persona can appear stable, principled, even admirable, while remaining disconnected from the deeper layers of the psyche. Private behavior tells a different story because the audience disappears. When no one is watching, the ego relaxes its vigilance. The individual no longer needs to defend an image or perform coherence. What remains is the relationship they have with themselves. This relationship determines how they speak internally, how they treat their own emotions, how they respond to boredom, solitude, temptation, or moral ambiguity. In these unobserved moments, ethical structure becomes visible. A person's integrity is not tested by scrutiny but by absence of it. When rules are unenforced and consequences unlikely, behavior emerges that reflects internalized values rather than external pressure. This is where moral orientation reveals itself, not as ideology but as instinct. The psyche acts according to what it has absorbed, not what it has promised. The split between public and private selves is not inherently pathological. Some degree of adaptation is necessary for social life. The problem arises when the distance between the two becomes too wide. When the persona dominates consciousness, the private self is pushed into shadow. Traits that do not fit the public image are suppressed rather than integrated. Over time, this suppression creates tension. The unconscious seeks expression often through subtle contradictions between what is displayed and what is done when unseen. These contradictions may appear trivial. Small dishonesties, private indulgences, quiet resentments, or moments of disregard that would never occur under observation, yet they form a pattern. Patterns reveal allegiance. They show whether a person's values are lived or merely endorsed. The psyche does not measure itself by ideals but by repetition. What is repeated in private shapes character far more than what is declared in public. There is also a psychological cost to maintaining a rigid persona. Constant self-monitoring fragments attention. Energy is spent on appearance rather than integration. The individual may become increasingly dependent on validation, needing the public gaze to feel real. In isolation, they may feel empty, restless, or uneasy, because the persona has no function without witnesses. This discomfort often leads to avoidance of solitude, not because the person dislikes being alone, but because solitude removes the structure that sustains their self-image. Those who exhibit alignment between public and private behavior possess a different inner economy. Their persona is flexible rather than armored. It reflects their inner values without requiring constant reinforcement. This does not mean they are flawless or transparent, but it suggests that fewer aspects of the self are disowned. What they present outwardly is not a fabrication but a selective expression of something already integrated. Such alignment often comes from a willingness to face inner contradictions. Instead of denying impulses that conflict with their ideals, they examine them. They allow discomfort to inform growth rather than concealment. As a result, there is less need for secrecy. Privacy remains, but it is not used to escape responsibility. The private space becomes a place of reflection rather than indulgence. Unobserved behavior also reveals how a person relates to power when no social cost is attached. Power exercised privately is especially revealing because it bypasses reputation. How someone treats objects, environments, animals, or systems that cannot respond socially indicates their underlying attitude toward dominance and care. These actions are rarely rehearsed. They emerge spontaneously, shaped by long-standing inner assumptions about entitlement and restraint. There is a temptation to idealize public virtue, to assume that consistency under observation guarantees authenticity. Yet history and psychology both show that prolonged performance can coexist with deep inner conflict. The psyche is capable of remarkable compartmentalization. One compartment hosts the admired self, the other the tolerated behaviors that never reach daylight. The wall between them is maintained through rationalization, a defense that allows the individual to preserve self-respect without self-examination. Private actions often escape moral narrative. They are not explained or justified. They simply occur. This makes them invaluable for understanding character. They show what a person does when explanation is unnecessary. When no story needs to be told, truth emerges in behavior rather than language. The contrast between public and private selves also influences relationships. Those closest to an individual often encounter behaviors that the wider world never sees. This discrepancy can create confusion, admiration mixed with unease. The partner, friend, or family member senses something misaligned but struggles to articulate it, especially when the public image is widely praised. The private reality feels invalidated by collective perception. For the individual, maintaining this split requires constant psychic effort. The shadow grows heavier as more material is hidden. Eventually, it seeks release, sometimes through sudden breakdowns, exposure, or impulsive acts that shock even the person themselves. These moments are not accidents, but eruptions of unacknowledged content that has been gathering force outside awareness. Observing how someone behaves when unobserved requires patience and subtlety. It cannot be demanded or provoked directly. It reveals itself over time, in relaxed moments, in forgotten details, in habits that persist without supervision. These moments do not announce their significance, they whisper it. To understand this contrast is also to turn the lens inward. Everyone carries discrepancies between who they appear to be and who they are when alone. Awareness of this gap is the beginning of integration. The goal is not to eliminate the persona, but to reduce its distance from the inner self. When public behavior becomes an extension rather than a disguise, the psyche experiences coherence rather than strain. Character, then, is not proven by performance, but by continuity. Continuity between seen and unseen actions, between spoken values and lived habits, between the self that faces the world and the self that remains when the world withdraws. In this continuity, or lack of it, the deeper truth of a person's psychological structure quietly reveals itself in the spaces where no one is watching and nothing is required to be shown. The emotional reflexes that surface under frustration and disappointment emerge from regions of the psyche that lie far beneath intention or moral reasoning. These reflexes are not chosen, they arise. They are shaped long before the present moment, forged through repetition, early adaptation, and unexamined emotional memory. When expectations collapse or desires are blocked, the conscious mind momentarily loses authority, and what responds instead is the structure that has been quietly governing reactions all along. Frustration compresses time. It removes the pause between impulse and action. In that compression, the psyche reveals its preferred defenses. Some move instantly toward anger, others toward withdrawal, others toward self-blame or accusation. These responses are not random. They are solutions the psyche learned when it first encountered disappointment and discovered what seemed to restore balance or safety. Over time, these solutions became automatic, embedded into the nervous system as reflex rather than choice. Anger, for many, is the fastest way to regain a sense of power. When disappointment threatens self-worth, anger expands the ego, pushing outward against the feeling of diminishment. It creates the sensation of strength, even when vulnerability is the true underlying experience. This reflex often masks fear, shame, or helplessness. The individual may believe they are reacting to the present situation, but their intensity often belongs to an earlier moment when powerlessness felt unbearable. Others respond to frustration with silence or emotional retreat. This withdrawal is not indifference but protection. By disengaging, the psyche attempts to reduce exposure to further disappointment. It narrows the field of emotional risk. While this can appear calm on the surface, internally it often carries unexpressed resentment or grief. The energy of the reaction turns inward rather than outward, shaping a private narrative of defeat or injustice that remains unseen but influential. Self-criticism is another common reflex. When expectations fail, some turn against themselves, interpreting frustration as proof of inadequacy. This response often develops in environments where approval was conditional and failure met with judgment rather than support. The psyche internalizes the critical voice to anticipate rejection and regain a sense of control through self-punishment. In this pattern, disappointment is not experienced as a situational outcome but as confirmation of a flawed identity. Blame directed outward operates differently. Here the psyche protects the self-image by assigning fault elsewhere. Circumstances, people, timing, or system become the cause of frustration. While external factors may indeed play a role, the reflexive need to locate fault reveals intolerance for inner conflict. Accepting disappointment would require accepting limitation, and limitation threatens an ego built on competence or superiority. There are also more subtle reflexes that escape immediate notice. Sarcasm, humor, dismissal, or intellectualization can all function as emotional armor. By reframing disappointment as trivial or amusing, the psyche avoids fully feeling it. These strategies are often socially rewarded, making them difficult to recognize as defenses. Yet they still indicate an avoidance of direct emotional engagement, a preference for distance over contact within a discomfort. What makes these reflexes revealing is their consistency. Different disappointments trigger the same emotional sequence regardless of context. The psyche repeats what it knows. It does not seek truth, it seeks familiarity. This repetition shows where growth has stalled and where awareness has not yet reached. A reflex that remains unchanged over years signals unresolved material that continues to operate autonomously. Those who have developed awareness of their emotional reflexes experience frustration differently. The initial impulse still arises, but it is observed rather than enacted. Observation introduces space. In that space, the reflex loses its authority. Anger can be felt without being expressed destructively. Withdrawal can be noticed without becoming isolation. Self-criticism can be recognized as an echo rather than a verdict. This capacity does not eliminate discomfort. It transforms the relationship to it. Such individuals have learned that disappointment does not threaten existence. It threatens expectation. The psyche that can tolerate this distinction does not rush to defend itself. It allows frustration to unfold, revealing information about desire, attachment, and assumption. Instead of reacting, it listens. Listening is not passive. It is an active engagement with inner reality, a willingness to encounter what arises without immediate correction. Emotional reflexes also reveal how a person relates to time. Impatient reactions often reflect an intolerance for delay, an urgency rooted in anxiety rather than necessity. The inability to wait amplifies frustration, turning minor obstacles into major disturbances. This urgency frequently originates early experiences where needs were inconsistently met, teaching the psyche that delay equals denial. Disappointment around recognition exposes another layer. When emotional reactions are disproportionate to the situation, they often point to a deeper hunger for being seen. The reflex may be envy, bitterness, or detachment, but beneath it lies a longing for affirmation that has remained unfulfilled. The psyche reacts not only to the present absence but to the accumulation of past invisibility. Even calm reactions can be deceptive. Some individuals appear unbothered by frustration, yet this composure may reflect emotional numbing rather than integration. When reflexes are absent rather than regulated, it suggests a disconnect rather than maturity. True integration allows emotion to move without overwhelming the system. Numbing freezes it entirely. Observing these reflexes over time reveals whether a person evolves through frustration or circles within it. Evolution requires reflection, a willingness to question why certain disappointments hurt more than others, and what inner assumptions they threaten. Without this inquiry, reflexes harden into traits, and traits solidify into character. These reactions are not flaws to be eliminated but messages to be understood. They point toward unmet needs, disowned impulses, and unresolved conflicts seeking recognition. When ignored, they repeat. When acknowledged, they transform. The psyche does not demand perfection, it demands attention. To witness someone under disappointment is to see how they negotiate the boundary between desire and reality. Whether they collapse, attack, adapt, or reflect shows how they relate to loss, delay, and limitation. In these moments, the cultivated image fades, and the emotional truth steps forward, expressing itself not in words but in tone, timing, and instinctive movement, revealing the deep patterns that govern how the individual meets resistance, uncertainty, and the inevitable refusal of the world to conform to expectations.